Inside the mind of a man obsessed with the untouchable woman, Carl Jung. What would you think if I told you that the most dangerous woman in a man's psyche is the one he cannot possess? She doesn't scream. She doesn't chase. She doesn't bend to the hunger of male validation. Her silence is not empty, it is sacred. Her absence, not rejection, but revelation. She is the archetype that haunts the dreams of men who have never faced their shadows. The one they label mysterious, difficult, cold. But what they really mean is unreachable. What they really feel is the erosion of their control. In the hidden chambers of the masculine unconscious, there lives a longing for the anima, Jung's term for the feminine soul image projected onto the woman. She becomes his muse, his mirror, the echo of everything he represses. He believes he loves her. But what he truly craves is himself, reflected back through her validation. And when she withdraws, detaches, disappears into her sovereignty, something primal and wounded unravels inside him. He calls it love. But it is obsession, because to the man who has not integrated his unconscious, the woman he cannot access becomes a symbol of what he lacks: emotional freedom, spiritual depth, inner stillness. She becomes not a person, but a portal. And the more she refuses to be defined by him, the more he spirals into the grip of psychic hunger, a need not for intimacy, but for ownership. Not to meet her, but to consume her. You've seen it. Maybe you've felt it. The kind of gaze that lingers too long. The sudden surge of affection after you've let go. The man who ignored your depth until you walked away, and then suddenly, you became his fixation. Why? Not because he finally understood your worth, but because your detachment triggered his ego death. Because when a woman stops feeding the male projection, she forces him to meet himself, and most men are not ready for that reckoning. In her stillness, he sees his noise. In her peace, his chaos. In her indifference, his insignificance. She is the dark mirror he never wanted to face. Not because she is cruel, but because she no longer performs for his gaze. She no longer bleeds just to prove she's alive. She no longer dances for crumbs. And so, he obsesses. Not over her, but over the version of himself he cannot reclaim through her anymore. This is not attraction. This is trauma looping through fantasy. The child in him, neglected, unseen, emotionally starved, sees in her a mother, a goddess, a savior. But she refuses all roles. She won't rescue. She won't nurture what drains her. She is not the womb for his rebirth. And that, to the ego, is devastation. The Stoics knew this ache. Epictetus warned, it is not things themselves that disturb us, but our opinions about them. The untouchable woman does nothing to the man. She simply exists, freely, fully. But his interpretation of her detachment? It crushes him, because it tells him the truth he never wanted to hear: he is not needed. And for the man who defines his worth by conquest, that is unbearable. But this woman, she does not play the game. She does not fear his absence. She has befriended solitude and made silence her sanctuary. He texts, she doesn't reply. He shows up, she smiles but does not stay. He confesses love, she hears, but does not bend. Not because she is bitter, but because she has seen the cycle. The pursuit, the possession, the discard. She has lived it, and she has risen above it. She has outgrown the archetype of the pleaser. She no longer dances with men who only love when they lose. She is not here to be understood. She is here to be herself. And so, he returns, again and again, drawn not to her body, but to her mystery. But the mystery is not her. It is his own unconscious calling. His anima unlived. His emotions unprocessed. His truth untold. She is the trigger, not the cause. Inside his mind, obsession brews. But not over her presence, over the power she took back. She became the thing he couldn't name. And nothing haunts a man more than the woman he cannot explain. He cannot name her because she refuses to be categorized. She slips through his definitions like smoke through a clenched fist. She is not mine, not almost, not forever, she simply is. And in that state of sovereign being, she exposes the void he spent a lifetime avoiding. Not because she aims to harm him, but because she exists beyond him. And for the unevolved masculine, there is no greater wound than irrelevance. The untouchable woman doesn't weaponize her distance. She is not performing aloofness to entice. Her detachment is not strategy, it is truth. She has simply ceased betraying herself for the comfort of a man who cannot meet her where she lives, in depth, in stillness, in the sacred inner terrain where no performance survives. He says she's confusing, that she gives mixed signals, that one day she's warm and the next, a wall. But what he calls inconsistency is simply her boundary awakening. What he mistakes for coldness is the heat of her self-respect no longer available for sale. Carl Jung knew the terror of the feminine when it ceased to be projected, when it returned to itself, whole and unyielding. He saw that the anima, when withdrawn from fantasy, becomes the force that leads a man inward. No longer a siren calling him to obsession, but a guide into his own unconscious. A mirror not for possession, but for integration. But few men make that descent. Most hover at the edges of that dark well, trying to pull her back into the light of their ego's approval. When she doesn't come, obsession begins. They replay old conversations, scroll through her photos, reread her silence. They ask, what changed? But they don't really want the answer. Because the answer is this: she did. She saw through the illusion. Saw how her softness had become currency. Saw how every inch she gave was consumed and never replenished. She stopped seeking safety in someone who only held her when she was shrinking. And when she stopped asking to be chosen, she chose herself. You may feel tempted to blame her, to call her damaged, guarded, hard. But the truth is, she simply became clear. And clarity, to a man who fed on her confusion, is fatal. She used to dream of being understood. Now, she simply wants to be left unmistakable. No mixed signals, no anxious waiting, no more giving herself in pieces to those who couldn't hold the whole. Her mystery was never about being hidden. It was about not being seen correctly. And now that she sees herself clearly, she will no longer allow herself to be distorted by the lens of an undeveloped ego. And so he spirals, because the moment she no longer needs him is the moment he finally feels her power. Not the power she used to give, but the power she took back. She doesn't block him, doesn't fight, doesn't explain. She simply vanishes from the narrative. And that silence is louder than any closure. It is not vengeance, it is transcendence. She has stepped out of the loop, the cycle of being loved only when lost, desired only when distant, adored only when broken. She no longer makes her pain digestible for others. No longer hands her worth to men in the hope they'll carry it gently. She holds it now, and when a man tries to enter her space, he does not meet a woman desperate to be chosen, he meets requirements. And for the man who lives through conquest, who believes passion must come from possession, this becomes an obsession. Not because he loves her, but because he doesn't know how to let go of what he could never own. She is the anima unclaimed, the mirror that no longer reflects him, the muse that returned to her mountain. She doesn't remind him of love, she reminds him of everything he refused to become. And that reminder will echo long after her name fades. Because some women leave a silence you can't drown in noise. Some women stop answering, and the unanswered space becomes a sacred wound. He may move on, find others, distract himself, but a part of him will always ache where she once stood, not because of what she gave, but because of what she represented. Freedom, and nothing haunts the unawakened man more than the woman who found her wings. Obsession is not born in love, it is born in powerlessness. And the untouchable woman is power, incarnate. She does not scream it. She does not post it. She does not wear it like armor. She embodies it in the way she no longer explains her silence. In the way she doesn't look back. In the way she no longer bends when his presence reappears like a storm pretending to be rain. Inside the mind of the obsessed man, there is chaos. But it is not the chaos she created. It is the chaos she revealed. She became the trigger for every abandonment wound he never addressed. For every time he was made to feel invisible. For every place inside him still begging to be seen, but refusing to face itself. She became the symbol of what he could not dominate, and so he declared her the villain. Cold, narcissistic, emotionally unavailable. But it was never her detachment that hurt him, it was the mirror it held up. It was the realization that his charm, his control, his emotional performance no longer worked. That his patterns no longer penetrated. She had changed frequencies, and now, all he could hear was static. You see, a woman does not become untouchable overnight. She becomes untouchable the day she watches herself beg in the mirror and realizes she would rather be alone than misunderstood again. The day she deletes the draft that explains her heart and says nothing instead. The day she stops writing poetry for those who never learned to read her. It is in those quiet acts of reclamation that she rises. Not as revenge, but as restoration. The obsessed man remembers every detail. The way she looked at him when she still hoped. The way she softened when she laughed. The way she offered herself, not her body, but her becoming. And he threw it away, thinking it would always be there. Thinking he had time. Thinking her light would wait for his darkness to catch up. But it didn't. She burned the version of herself that waited. Buried the girl who performed. And now, when he tries to return, he finds a woman who no longer translates her soul into a language he can understand. She speaks in silence now. And he doesn't know how to listen. Inside his mind, the image of her becomes distorted. Fantasized. Idolized. He remembers her now as perfect, not because she was, but because the mind idealizes what the heart failed to hold. He turns her into myth, into symbol, into ache. Because it is easier to obsess over the fantasy than to confront the truth, that she evolved beyond his reach. Jung once said that projection is the root of our misunderstandings. We see not others, but ourselves in them. The obsessed man never saw her clearly. He saw his unmet needs, his lost innocence, his emotional mother wound reflected back in her gaze. And when she stepped out of that role, he did not lose a woman, he lost a mirror. A drug, a dream, but she is no dream. She is flesh, blood, boundaries. She is not here to be your healing, your muse, your justification. She is not a chapter in your hero's journey. She is the author of her own myth, and she has stopped writing men like you into her ending. Her glow is no longer available for those who arrive late. Her softness no longer blooms for those who hold it like a weapon. She will not burn for anyone who would not even bring a match. She is done being someone's awakening at the cost of her own peace. And now, she exists, out there, somewhere, living in quiet freedom. Maybe laughing with friends, maybe sipping tea on a balcony at sunrise, maybe falling in love again, but slowly, cautiously, on her terms. Or maybe she isn't with anyone at all. Maybe she's just being, but wherever she is not thinking about him. And that is what kills him. Not her absence, not her silence, but her indifference, the cruel kindness of being forgotten by the woman who once saw galaxies in him. He searches for her in every new face. He performs better, says the right things, tries to recreate the connection. But he can't, because the obsession was never about her, it was about who he was when she still cared. And that version of her, the one who would have waited, no longer exists. The woman he obsesses over is no longer real, not in the way his memory insists. She's become a phantom stitched from regret and projection, wrapped in longing and crowned with the illusion of what could have been. But beneath the fantasy lies a deeper truth. He did not want her when he had her, only when she became beyond him. This is the pattern of the unevolved masculine, to dismiss the light when it shines freely, and chase it only once it withdraws. To mistake access for value, and scarcity for love. He did not love her presence, he was addicted to the power her attention gave him. And now, stripped of it, he is left not with heartbreak, but ego death. It's important to understand this, obsession is not about the woman herself. It's about the self that no longer feels real without her gaze. Her silence didn't kill his love, it killed the illusion of dominance. When she stopped orbiting him, he lost gravity. He says he misses her, but he doesn't know her. He knows the version of her that needed him. The version that answered at midnight. The version that apologized first. The version that stayed. But the woman she's become? The one who trusts her solitude, who no longer romanticizes emotional breadcrumbs, who left the cage with the door wide open, he will never know her. Because obsession is blind. It chases shadows, not substance. And the woman he obsesses over now, the untouchable one, is untouchable not because she is cruel, but because she no longer lives in the emotional architecture he helped build. She knocked it down, planted herself in silence, and grew. What remains is a man haunted by the echo of a connection he never understood, trying to recreate it with ghosts. And the tragedy is this, he could have loved her. Not the projection, not the performance, but the real her. But that would have required presence, effort, vulnerability, things he only discovered after she was gone. Now, he analyzes every moment, searches for signs, wonders when she started pulling away. But he'll never find the answer. Because it didn't happen all at once. It was the accumulation of small betrayals, not of her trust, but of herself. Every time she said yes when she wanted to say no. Every time she forgave what her soul still bled from. Every time she believed the potential instead of the pattern. She didn't stop loving him. She stopped abandoning herself for him. And that is where obsession is born, in the space where power once was. In the absence of a woman who no longer needs to be seen to know she exists. He checks her profile, sees her thriving, not flaunting, not performing, just existing, calm, composed, unavailable, not because she's taken, but because she is full. The attention of men now rolls off her like rain off stone. She is not impressed by effort born from regret. She is not moved by apologies that come after the damage has calcified. Because she no longer lives for potential. She lives for peace. Jung said, your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes. And that's the truth of this obsession, it is a dream. A fantasy projected outward to avoid the inward gaze. The man who obsesses does not want to wake. Because to wake would mean to feel, and feeling is the doorway to healing, the place where excuses die and accountability begins. But she is already awake. And that is what makes her untouchable. Not because she hides, but because she no longer makes herself small enough to be reached by those who refuse to grow. She no longer needs to be chosen. She chooses, not from desperation, but from discernment. Not from loneliness, but from clarity. And if you cannot meet her there, in presence, in truth, in depth, you will not meet her at all. She is not your story anymore. Not your muse, not your lesson. She is the chapter that closed itself, without drama, without announcement. Just the quiet turning of a page. And you will hear that silence forever. There comes a point in the spiral of obsession where even memory begins to betray him. He no longer recalls her accurately, only how she made him feel, and even that is filtered through shame, regret, longing. She becomes a symbol, a cipher, a riddle he cannot solve. Not because she's complex, but because he refused to meet her with simplicity when it mattered. The mind of the obsessed man is not filled with love, it is filled with the ache of unclaimed growth. He is not mourning the loss of her, he is mourning the version of himself that she awakened, briefly, when her heart was still open. He touches that version now only in dreams. She once saw potential in him before he could see it himself. But he mistook that vision for a guarantee. He thought he had time. He thought she would always remain, soft, available, forgiving. But she didn't leave because she stopped loving. She left because she finally loved herself more. And that shift, subtle, sacred, irreversible, becomes the split from which his obsession is born. He becomes attached to the last place he felt like more. He clings to her not because he is bound to her, but because without her, he is faced with himself. And the self he sees in her absence is unfulfilled, emotionally hollow, underdeveloped. She was the mirror, and she walked away. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "It is not death that a man should fear, but never beginning to live." And that is the great tragedy of the obsessed man. He fears her indifference more than he ever feared his own emotional death. She offered him the chance to live, and he hesitated. And now, she lives beyond him. He may attempt to recreate her in others. Search for her softness in a new woman's eyes. Project her depth onto shallow waters. But the echo will not match the source. And over time, he will learn, she was not extraordinary because she gave him love. She was extraordinary because she loved him in spite of himself. And he squandered it. The untouchable woman isn't untouchable because she wants to be desired. She is untouchable because she refuses to be reduced. She refuses to shrink her standards to fit someone else's emotional limitations. She refuses to beg to be seen by someone who only looked at her when it was convenient. She doesn't run, she simply no longer waits. She's not hiding, she's healing. She's not punishing, she's protecting. She is no longer accessible because her access is now sacred. Her energy, her time, her body, they are no longer currencies to be traded for attention. They are temples, and she has become their guardian. And what obsesses the man is not her presence, but his own inability to reclaim the version of himself who had the chance to meet her there, fully, vulnerably, honestly, and didn't. The woman who walked away was once the girl who stayed too long. Who tolerated too much. Who whispered love into deaf ears and handed tenderness to rough hands. She is not bitter. She is awake. She no longer confuses attraction with alignment, or intensity with intimacy. And now, she will not open for anything less than reverence. She may still think of him, but not with longing. With clarity, with grace, with the soft power of a woman who no longer mourns the love that could have been. Because she has seen what happens when she waits, and what happens when she walks. And in her walking, she found wings. The man who obsesses will try to catch that flight. But obsession cannot fly, it clings, and what clings will always fall behind. And so she moves forward. Quietly, powerfully, no announcement, no farewell, just presence, just peace. Because the woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.